members were appointed through transparent, open, merit-based competition involving independent international experts in the decision-making with the majority of votes on their side. For the first time in our history, judges for the Constitutional Court will also be selected through a similar competitive procedure. The best international experts from US, EU, and the Venice Commission are already working on this process. These changes aims to reset the entire system by bringing in promising candidates with the unquestionable integrity criteria to their positions. We're also enhancing financial monitoring tools and ensuring transparency in the officials' financial affairs. The electronic asset declarations were restored, and the public asset access to these declarations, despite the war, has been ensured by law. Financial oversight of politically exposed persons now adheres to the golden standards set by international norms. As we tackle the deep-rooted issue of corruption, promising results are beginning to emerge. Data shows that Ukrainians are starting to trust key institutions again. It means that we are on the right track in achieving our goal. People feel the change. According to the latest foreign surveys, 59% of Ukrainians now believe that the real steps are being taken, that the real impact is to follow, and they see positive changes in our country. We remain steadfast in our commitment to reforms. By working hard every day, we created a strong basis for a positive decision to open the accession negotiations with Ukraine, for setting up a sustainable and a clear financial framework for support of Ukraine's accession bid and macro-financial stability throughout the war. We are looking forward to this historically important decision of the European Council that would allow us to move to the next stage of EU-Ukraine relations. Now, Ukrainians, like no other nation in the world, know the importance of ensuring development and reforming of our country. We now understand that this is the way of setting in stone our bid for democracy, our bid for freedom and prosperity. This is our fight as well. A closer partnership with Ukraine will contribute to the further anti-corruption efforts, promoting transparency, accountability, and making these principles as the core ones in every sector of our life. We have managed to undertake a significant efforts to prevent our country from further influence of wasted interests through oligarchs and their proxies. This is already a past of Ukraine. The major message from our government these days is that we are proud of our commitment. We are proud of our resolve and resilience. We are proud of being backed up by Ukraine's civil society and knowing that Ukrainian people, Ukrainian think tanks, Ukrainian experts are the major watchdogs of Ukraine's transformation. We are proud of our accomplishments. But the major message from our side is that we will continue. These reforms will be continuous. These reforms will bring to more resilience, more sustainability, and more trust into the institutions. Rest assured, as it has always been this way, Ukraine will not let down all the efforts of support, which we saw from day one of the full-scale aggression. We will not give up on our efforts, and we will succeed. Ukraine will win. Europe will live. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Well, quite an inspiring speech, and remotely I'm thanking to Vice Prime Minister for that. And I would say that we have a lot to discuss from that. So has Ukraine left in its past those corruption practices, those examples of malign influence, and we will try to discuss that between Kyiv and Brussels. Soon we are expecting to have representative of the EU delegation in Ukraine here with us. He's not here yet, but we'll start discussing that from Kyiv studio. And we have in our studio Alexei Zhmarinetsky, member of the Parliament of Ukraine. Yeah, sorry, we did not have a chance to meet earlier. So I invite you to express your vision. How will Ukraine ensure that all these practices have remained in past, and especially focusing on tasks that are still left for Ukraine to meet EU criteria for start of negotiations? Alexei, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I think Ukraine is fulfilling our obligation constantly, and we have very strong majority in the parliament and in the committee, anti-corruption committee, to vote any needed initiative, any needed law against corruption. And during this year, we restored e-declarations despite the war. We plan to enlarge capacity of National Anti-Corruption Bureau in terms of personnel for this bureau. Later this week, we plan to adopt, to strengthen Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor Office independence. And we manage independent and transparent adoption of new anti-corruption bureau head.
But what are you going to do now to ensure that it...
And it's very important that Ukraine adopted the strictest, I think, the most hard legislation in field of politically exposed person among all European countries and the European Union as a body. It's very important. And that's why I want to say that Ukraine now have, I think, the most developed anti-corruption infrastructure in terms of legislation among all European countries. And now we need implementation, efficient implementation of this legislation, because the parliament, I think, constantly fulfill our responsibility to adopt all needed laws.
Thank you, Alexei. But let me ask, so are you going to adopt something else? Do you see that there are some gaps to convince the EU before the December summit that Ukraine is really ready?
Now we have some amendments to our e-declaration legislation. Anti-corruption committee already adopted it on the level of committee, and I think till the end of this year we will adopt these amendments. And it's only one, I think, gap in our responsibility.
Thank you very much. And that was my failure in the very beginning, that I did not say that we have to stick to limit 5 minutes for max for one person, but you have met it perfectly. Olena Halushka from Ukraine, International Center of Ukraine Victory, and many other organizations that you are in as a representative of the civil society. Could you please show your vision? Can we say that civil society is heard, or there are some issues still?
So first of all, I would like to stress, and that's something which we try to communicate to all of our international partners, is that Ukraine is fighting against corruption not because the EU demands, IMF wants, or the US instructs us. There is huge demand in the Ukrainian society for the real fight against corruption. This is the demand for justice, which brought us to the streets during the Revolution of Dignity, and we continue transforming our country because the society wants this. And if you take a look at the figures, you know, with the Ukrainians, more than 80% of Ukrainians supporting Euro integration, this gives very powerful leverage in the hands of the European Union to help promote the right reforms. But I like and I find illustrative another figure, which is 73% of people want European Union to demand reforms very strictly. So they do not see Euro integration as something which happens overnight, but they also realize that this is the process within which we are going to fix our institutions and build the real rule of law. And the e-declarations case, which colleague Mr. Żmaranecki mentioned, is, from my perspective, very interesting illustration, because the demand of Ukrainian society has been much more harsh on that, because international community did not ask for the opening of the registry, but the petition collected over the 2 nights, 2 days, 83,000 votes, and this message was very clearly heard by the Ukrainian government. With regards to consulting with the civil society, I would very much encourage international partners to do that more, and European Union and member states, because we are here on the ground, we follow the dynamics very closely, and we can help, you know, to define jointly better the most urgent priorities. Because the latest case, you know, with these 4 steps that European Union attached to the European Commission attached to the possible after opening of the negotiations, it, for example, includes the law on lobbying, which wasn't part of the 7 reform conditionalities. It was mentioned among a lot of other issues in the Venice Commission ruling on the de-oligarchization law, but that was not explicitly mentioned as the demand. At the same time, something like the full revoke of the Lozove's amendments, which would close the loopholes that oligarchs are currently abusing in order to protect themselves from justice, was somehow dropped out of the radars and out of the priorities. I think that it's very important to focus this leverage and make maximum use of this. And the very last point is that EU integration is the super powerful, probably the best leverage which we could have achieved for the rule of law and anti-corruption reforms. But it would only work if the European Union delivers from your part as well. So merit-based approach is incredibly important. And please do not link Ukrainian accession to any internal European debates, EU reform, or anything else which can stuck the process and deprive us as the civil society of the very powerful tool. So Ukraine's EU integration should move forward based on the progress that we deliver. Thanks.
Many thanks, Olena. And it really paves the way for an introductory speech from the EU delegation to Ukraine. And we have Asier Santilan with us, head of section in the EU delegation to Ukraine, responsible for governance and rule of law. And I would ask you, Asier, to focus not only on current, let's say, preliminary demands which are linked to opening of negotiations. Our path towards membership would be quite long. And definitely there would be, I think so, there would be more demands or requirements that are related to anti-corruption. Would you share that approach? Could you see that we will have some important things to do that are already visible to meet demands of 23rd article?
Sure. I mean, if we analyze, well, first of all, tomorrow we are celebrating the day of anti-corruption day. But this year, I think that is very relevant because it's linked with security and also with conflict. And I think that this is something that is definitely very relevant for the country. And if you analyze a little bit what has been occurring, let's say, in the enlargement process of Ukraine, somehow it has been also linked with the conflict and in particular the last 2 years. So 4 days after the fully fledged invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine, the 20th requested let's say the access to the European Union, and it was accepted immediately in June that year. But within the approval and then after the Commission decision, there were a number of conditions. You mentioned the 7 steps. In the 7 steps, they had a number of requirements linked with anti-corruption. The 4 later on requirements that are linked, let's say, with the report that it was approved 1 month ago already, well, approved, published 1 month ago. Again, we have a number of requirements linked with anti-corruption. But they are not because the European Union only wants to facilitate, let's say, the change on anti-corruption within Ukraine. They are also linked, as you well mentioned, because the civil society and the society as such in Ukraine is asking to make change around anti-corruption. I think that it is important to link that the process is definitely going in parallel with a process that is happening within the society in Ukraine. You have more, and we are feeling more and more pressure coming from the society, from the institutions, from the government in terms of making a change on anti-corruption. There are a number of improvements in legislation, in practice, but also in the society as such. The society has understood that anti-corruption is linked also with the fact of winning the war. And this is something that is very relevant, that it is also helping us as international community in the terms of, let's say, encouraging change in the country. So it's not only the EU, it's not only the international community, it's not only about reports, about conditions, etc. It's about how those conditions are implemented, but especially how those conditions are accepted by or integrated in the daily life of the Ukrainian society.
Okay, and do you expect that what we have already done is less or more than we still have to do in our path towards the EU?
Well, the EU process is something, it's a kind of a marathon. So sometimes I have the feeling that it wants to be a half marathon or even a competition of 10 kilometers, but it's not 10 kilometers. We're talking about 42 kilometers. So we need to think sometimes in perspective. A good marathon runner usually prepares the race in the different phases. First is looking at the first objectives in the first 10 kilometers. After assessing how the first 10 kilometers go, then is looking at the 20 kilometers, then 30, then 40, and the last 2 kilometers are, also very important. And this is also the process with anti-corruption. Anti-corruption is included within the fundamentals of the accession to the European Union. And it's not only that you did a good job, because you did a good job. And it's amazing. I mean, I was thinking 10 years ago, I was working in Colombia. We were developing also the anti-corruption strategy, plus facilitating the opening the first anti-corruption office in Colombia. And if I compare what happened in the last 10 years in that country and what happened in the last 2 years or even in the last 6 months in this country, most probably the change here definitely is much more deep than in 10 years in Colombia.
Thank you much, Asier. And it kicks us to Brussels studio. Before I give floor to Tina and her guests, I would ask everyone here and there to prepare your interventions, your questions, because after all introductory statements, we will go to the discussion. Tina, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sergey. It was really, really, I don't know, insightful for us to hear the impressions and have some food for thought this morning from Kyiv. Also, let me note that Katerina Maternova, who was foreseen to join us according to the preliminary program, had to cancel her participation due to last-minute changes. But we are very happy to have here the representative from the European Commission, Wolfgang Nozar, Head of Unit on Fundamentals, Rule of Law, Anti-Fraud and Financial Management. So thanks, Wolfgang, for being with us. And I just really want to start from you, because we just heard what Kyiv thinks. They mentioned a lot of things. I don't want to repeat them, including the merit-based approach from the EU and whether you will deliver. But maybe as a good starting point, just share with us the Brussels point of view, where Ukraine stands. We saw the 4 steps, out of which 3 is really on the corruption, where Ukraine stands. And, you know, if you could give us the message, what is expected from Ukraine beyond this brief description, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I would like to start with repeating what all of you, of course, know already, and that is that we from the European Commission side, but also the member states in the Council, have said already a number of years ago, this clear focus on the fundamentals first. So the fundamentals for us really are the rule of law, democratic institutions, and economic development. This for us is really at the heart of the process, and this was also for us the starting point when Ukraine applied for membership. All 7 steps we set at the time are directly linked to the fundamentals. You also mentioned the 4 remaining issues. These are not new inventions. These all stem from the 7 steps, and these were things where we assessed that we need a little bit more work from Ukraine to fully get there and meet the 7 steps. We've already heard 3 of them are more or less directly linked to anti-corruption. But this already shows that there was massive progress on the 7 steps. So, and we have acknowledged this in the annual report. So there was a lot of good work done. And these last elements are also developing quite quickly. My understanding is there will be a vote in the Parliament already today on several legislative amendments. So I would really like to underline this important progress that has been made so far. But now we are looking forward. So we will have the European Council, 14th and 15th of December. We from the European Commission side have recommended to member states to open accession negotiations. This was an unconditional recommendation. We just said these 4 steps have still to be, or these 4 remaining elements have still to be met before we adopt the negotiating framework. But this is not delaying the process as such, because our recommendation also was that we would immediately start the screening process, which is an important first element of the accession negotiations, where we, from the Commission side, present the European acquis, and the country presents where it stands, and it leads to screening reports, and this is really the basis for the future accession negotiations. And what I'm trying to say with this, the screening process will actually show how broad our rule of law requirements are and how many things need to be addressed. So the 7 steps, this was just sort of the first part of the journey. And I don't want to talk about the marathon again, but indeed the accession negotiations is such an intense process that will require a lot of additional reform efforts from any enlargement country. But this also, of course, includes Ukraine. And we see that Ukraine needs to overall improve its business environment, its investment climate. We will have a huge task of reconstructing Ukraine. We, from the European Commission side, have proposed additional money with the Ukraine facility. So there's a lot of things that are happening. And anti-corruption efforts will be crucial to all of these efforts in a broad sense, but also specifically to the accession negotiations, where Chapter 23 will be at the heart of the process from the very beginning to the very end. And we expect, of course, a further strengthening of the anti-corruption institutions. We already saw a lot of progress, NABU, SAPO, the Anti-Corruption Court, NACP. But more work needs to be done to further strengthen them. And also, maintain their independence and not have any challenges to their competencies and their work. We want the anti-corruption program to be implemented, but for us at the very center of the center, if you like, it's the track record. This is what really counts for the Commission. This is what really counts for the member states. We want to see real results on the ground in fighting corruption. We want to see proper investigations. We want to see final convictions to really make sure that this process goes to the roots of the problems and produces sustainable results. From the Commission side, we are of course very much supporting this process, including with our EU anti-corruption initiative. We're also in very close contact with the authorities to provide advice. But the work has to be done on the ground by Ukraine. And just the last word, I think civil society plays a crucial role here, and we very much encourage the authorities to reach out, have broad stakeholder consultations, because only laws that are really accepted broadly in society can bring the process forward. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wolfgang. I will save my questions for you later. Let me now invite Alina, who is with us. She's a professor of comparative public policy, Alina Mungiopidi. I hope I pronounced it properly. And I'm very, very happy that you came all the way from Rome to be with us. You don't need an introduction. I think you're quite known in the field of corruption, but it will be very good academic studies I had in mind. But it would be very good to hear your experts, perspectives. How would you see the process? Why it is important? Where Ukraine stands, and what should you do, to deliver, to help Ukraine to deliver its track record as well?
Thank you very much. I looked at Ukraine a little bit already in my book, Europe's Burden, which assesses the success of the European Union in all 127 countries to which we gave money in exchange for some conditionalities for good governance, right? So people know, if they read this book, that I have rather a skeptical view that you can do very much.
I'm sorry, can we ask Alina to speak closer to the mic, because we hardly hear here in Kyiv.
I am going to grab the mic and bring it.
Maybe closer to the table will just work. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Is that all right? I'm getting across now?
Now it's fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So without further ado, on the basis of previous evaluations, also my experience with the Ukrainian civil society with whom we built Chesno, and my experience in Romania, where we created all these anti-corruption revolutions and the institutions which I now see copied and transferred in Moldova, in Ukraine, then in other parts. And for us who created them now at the end of the cycle, we really have a more realistic view of how they perform. If you have a 20 years perspectives, let me say a few provocative things and make 3 very clear proposals. Provocative thing number 1 is that we do have in corruption studies now a consensus that corruption is not best addressed by anti-corruption reforms. I put this very provocatively because people have to understand that when you have systematic corruption, what you have to build, it's a norm of integrity on the basis of which the state operates. You cannot build this norm by arresting a few people. What you can create by arresting a few people is you can create a practice of discretionary arrest. Now you can have, good people in government and bad people to arrest. In my life, I drank champagne when I put my prime minister in jail and the rest, but then I saw how this mechanism is later converted. So this needs a lot of balance to all these political elements. The second thing is that there is no successful anti-corruption in the world based on judicial anti-corruption, except if the country was a shining country and it had only a few corrupt people, which is definitely not the case of Ukraine. The judiciary, when it is a part of the problem, cannot be part of the solution. Of course, we have to reform the judiciaries in Moldova, in Albania, in Ukraine, but this will take us many years until the judiciary will deliver. So they should not be conceived as part of our solution. They should be conceived as part of a problem that we solve, that we address, right? So it doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do, not on the contrary. What we have to do is to prevent all this corruption from getting produced in the first place. And here Ukraine did these extraordinary reforms. Before the war started, Ukraine was on the top of my team, the de facto transparency index, as the country in the world which really had put out the most information there to help not only its horizontal accountability agencies, but everyone else. All the citizens would have enough tools. But still there were significant things missing, and these things are still missing now. So just to conclude with what doesn't work. What doesn't work are 5 years plans. You know, we had 5 years plans in Tunisia when we had a coup d'etat and it was the end. But the good news is that the 5 years plan was anyway not going anywhere. We had a 5 years plan in Peru. I mean, we have all these OECD lengthy things which don't prioritize anything because they're not based on a theory of change of what is actually missing to this country, who are actually the groups who want to change this country, but have a bureaucratic logic. Now, you cannot escape a bureaucratic logic when you are in a process of EU accession. Let's be realistic, okay? And EU accession does create an important incentive. You want to get there. More than anything else, people want to be in EU more than they want to clean their country. I mean, let's be realistic. That is the biggest incentive. But also, we know what happens after you get in EU. I mean, open up today and look at the public procurement scoreboard on the European Commission page, and you will see where Eastern Europe is. We will see where most countries in the second wave of accession is. What happens the day after you enter is that you just become yourself, you don't become worse. But look even at nice countries, Czech Republic, the indicator that we use for competitive, for corrupt procurement, the single bidding, used to have a European average of 12%. Now it's over 20% because after the pandemics, a lot of countries have driven it up. And we tend to speak about Hungary, but it's not just Hungary. It's Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Cyprus, and let alone Malta, who doesn't even bother to publish it. I mean, it's the blanks in the tender electronic daily are half full, right? So that's what happened. I mean, it's clearly that substantially we don't have much influence in these countries. And I like what Orlena said, that these countries really need to solve this issue for themselves. And I'm very optimistic about this because what comes out of historical studies is that there is no better opportunity to radically reform your country than existential threat. And if an existential threat doesn't exist now, then when? And if Ukraine still would be as corrupt as they were when we were doing Chesno, they wouldn't be here after 3 years. And they're here. So definitely they are less corrupt. Definitely something worse. Definitely some things are delivered. And I think we should build on these things. Now, what is missing? My 3 proposals, and with this I miss. I'm glad to see that ProZorro is gradually back online. But even when ProZorro was fully active, what was missing is, like in many, many cases of transparent procurement, was the public accountability link between how a contracting agency performs, right? Let's say we are defense agency in charge of buying airplanes, right? And what are the consequences for how it performs? This link is totally, totally missing. And in many countries these days, particularly donor assistance countries, you just have this formal link. I say, okay, it's some sort of public procurement agency which covers this, except public procurement agencies are not in the public accountability chain. They cannot fire anybody. They are just an outside actor who can perhaps plan, who can observe, who can evaluate, but not do more. So what Ukraine needs to do is roughly to have this bunch of risk indicators calculated by contracting agent, which is simpler because ProZorro, that is how it works. You just decide who are by the performance of everyone who is in charge of contracting to management. President Zelensky anyway fires people. I mean, I think Ukrainian legislation is really strong in terms of executive firing. So what we need is like some kind of contract between the head of the state, like they have in Rwanda, it's called the Mihigo, between the head of the state and each executive of an agency, in which you have indicators of corruption tied to your procurement. And if you do not execute these indicators, I mean, now I can pull you out a picture to see who has competitive procurement and who doesn't. And the second link which is missing and which is tied to this is that we need better we need a better unit and more implementation of some sort of cost standards, right? There is not a unified EU system like this, but I like the ex-EU British one. It's a superb system indicating to everybody how to do cost-effective procurement. And the same, by the way, should be applied to all concessions. Concessions and public procurement should have similar rules, so to see exactly if something is vulnerable or not. We have by now, all the tools exist, and Ukraine has digitalization enough and has good people. Okay, they don't have good people for this enough good people for this reconstruction. And reconstruction, of course, is going to be very corrupt because all reconstructions are corrupt. Now, what should we tell European publics? We should tell European publics that, the Afghanistan reconstruction was very corrupt and there were no Ukrainians there. The Haiti reconstructions were corrupt and there were no Ukrainians there. I mean, we should expect reconstruction to be corrupt, but not because of Ukrainians. Ukrainians are no particular case. This is how reconstructions work. We create so many opportunities for corruption that it becomes a problem to this. So what does Ukraine need in this? I think it needs us to train a generation of compliance officers, of integrity officers, of people who are there from the planning of what is going to make this money. And I think now they have developed great institutions due to war. I think it's more consultation between some mayors and the populations than ever before. And if Ukraine would not have had this fantastic civil society, war would have gone totally different. So I think there are some things, right? But we really need to create them into official positions. We need to have someone who is like a link between government and civil society, and who is the integrity person in aid, which is going, hopefully, to fly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alina. I think there's a lot of very practical solutions, I think, proposed by you, and many thanks for your bold and very, very clear messages. Again, I will save my questions for now, Sergey, and I will come to you to hear the comments and questions from Kyiv Roundtable.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tina. So now we are heading towards a discussion, and we will work like that. Kyiv has a word, and then Brussels has a word, but we can ask each of panelists. So Kyiv can ask someone from Brussels and vice versa. If there are, to be frank, I have my question. I will misuse my moderator's privilege, and I will start from that, but also I ask to raise hands for those who want to ask second. So my question will follow Asier's comparison with marathon. You say that, well, yeah, that is true. We are in marathon, but where we are? Start, middle, last miles. Let's make a very short round. Every of panelists here and in Brussels, your vision, where we are.
Well, I think that we are, first of all, in the marathon, perhaps in the first 10 kilometers, but please keep in mind that before starting a marathon implies that you need to be prepared, fit, and you need to train yourself. I think that in the last years, you have been training yourself, you are fit because now you have institutions, and you are ready to engage with the marathon.
Yeah.
In the first 10 kilometers, if I may say, I think that now, before answering your question on concrete objectives, perhaps for those first 10 kilometers, I will say that we are, or Ukraine is, or has to aim at reinforcing Nabu, yes, as also to strengthen the asset declaration verification framework and also to regulate lobbying. And this is something that has to be in those initial 10 kilometers.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go one by one. Let's see.
I have one proposition and the question for our Brussels colleagues. I propose to separate the legislation field and implementation. And when we say about legislation, what concrete points should we do in recent weeks, months, years, to say that Parliament already have done all needed points for European integration in field of anti-corruption?
So that's a question for
yeah.
Okay, let's go by that. Okay.
I will go to Wolfgang. I think the question to you, the separation of the legislation implementation, where Ukraine says what is expected.
Look, what I would say is the following, and I want to sort of pick up where Alina also left it. I think corruption is not an isolated area. And it's absolutely correct if you can't only do corruption-specific reforms and then solve the problem. That's why we, from the Commission side, have been for a long time saying we need to mainstream corruption. It has to be part of the full set of accession negotiations of all areas. We heard, for example, public procurement. Also, public administration is a key issue. You need merit-based recruitments in the public administration. You need salaries that can attract competent candidates. So I cannot tell you now you are at kilometer 5 or 10 or 15. I cannot tell you from all the legislation, it's exactly this, and this that you still need to do. You need to engage in the whole accession process and tackle all the different areas to make sure that the system is compatible with the EU system, but also to address the corruption problem in a broad area. What is, of course, absolutely correct is that legislation is one thing and implementation the other, and that's why the process will need a certain amount of time, because the implementation will not be possible from one day to the next, but it needs to develop and grow. And that's why I also talk about the track record, which is linked to many other reforms and areas. So you really need to see it as a whole and an exercise in many areas and not limited to specific issues.
Sergey, can we test basically? Can we collect the comments on Wolfgang's comment? Maybe does the Kyiv agree?
I think now it's your turn to ask, but in fact, I would also like to hear Brussels' position on where we are on the marathon, if that is possible, and then I invite Brussels studio to pose questions too.
Okay, so from the roundtable, where Ukraine stands in terms of the marathon, what I can say, reading the assessment of the European Commission that was the part of the new enlargement package, I was assessed that Ukraine has done around 90% of the homework, right, on the 7 steps, including corruption, but it was not highlighted how much of that came on the corruption. So your takes where Ukraine stands? Alina?
I'm sorry, I will disappoint our Kyiv colleagues. I'm completely against this approach. You know, in my youth, I was trained as a doctor, and I can say that this is like, you know, sorry, yes. This is a bit like, you know, you have a patient which is really in a bad state, and which you promise as a doctor to bring him somewhere, and you go there, and you give him a prescription, and you tell him what to eat, and you tell, you know, and when you go next time, the patient says, where do I stay, doctor, on the marathon? You know, only a very bad doctor will take the prescription and we say, did you do, how much did you do out of these 10 medicines? Okay, 80%. How much of the diet did you do? 80%. No, I think that what the doctor would do would consult the patient, because the patient may be dying with a 40 degrees fever and still fulfill everything on this prescription list. And I think that is a bit the concern. I mean, what I see here and what I hear here is that the concern for accession, on how to get there, is far higher than the concession on solving the problem, isn't it? Because I can suggest a number of indicators to see where you are. The Economist, for instance, publishes every 2 years a top of chronic capitalism, which is made bluntly, but, you know, helpfully enough, by reporting economic sectors which are the most connected to the government favor, rent-intensive sectors versus other sectors. And in 2021, Russia, of course, was #1 in the world, in Singapore, but Ukraine came fourth. All right, so I'm sure that EBRD, for instance, would join me in asking what were the reforms did to change this situation. Is this economy shifting to being more like Denmark's, or is it still an economy where, in fact, who gets to know more people in the government has the higher profit? And these are not laws, perhaps, to be added. They are sometimes laws to be removed, because this post-Soviet legislation is filled with legislation giving economic privilege of one way or another, or so complicated that only people with political connections can find their way around. And of course, we have superb models of administrative simplicity in Estonia, which gave us a world revolution in the 90s. So we know how to do this. And in Georgia. So what I would like to see is simply a list of laws that we will skip, of bad laws, to move closer to the common market and to the real open competition where we do not over-regulate, because this kind of over-regulation only gives privilege to certain groups.
And how should this list be developed? Do you expect the EU, or this should be, as you said, in consultation of both EU and Ukraine? I mean, does the EU bring, enough guidance?
I am convinced that EBRD has already done work on that.
Sure.
I'm convinced, and I'm convinced that they already discussed with some Ukrainian officials about that. This is about de facto demonopolization of certain sectors. Some things were done, but I think mostly energy was done because energy was the most prominent. But this exists in everything, even in education. You will discover that, this, what I call against ethical universalist legislation, because good legislation means that it applies universally to everyone. What corrupt countries have are all kinds of specifications that in fact only certain groups get this fiscal exemption, only certain groups get to be, PhD advisors. Whatever, it's full. So if you want to move away from that, and if you can, because there are countries which cannot, interest groups are too strong, like Morocco or other countries. But I think Ukraine can. First, you have to have a full inventory of this. For the economic part, I'm sure EBRD has the inventory because I talked with them repeatedly. And this is the plan. That's the plan, okay? And you have to do the plan now, not like in Greece when we left, we put everything which was not done into one omnibus legislation, and it's still a dead letter, 80% of it. Now, and we go year by year, what we added and what we removed. Because what is important to understand is that transformation, what Ukraine still needs to do, it's an unfinished transformation, like many East Europe. It's different than integration. They're really two different processes. They're supposed to help one another, but frequently what happens is in the Balkans is that countries do both, and they do integration most, because what they want is to join EU. And then they end up with formal and informal institutions aligned, and the gap between the two increases. And that is not helpful, in particular if you have a test there, something which tests you as a war.
Sure. Thank you so much. Sergey, over to you, I think.
I would like to also contribute with several ideas.
This piece does not work. The one which you are moving, it does not affect the sound. I would kindly ask Brussels studio just to speak towards the camera. I think that the mic is somewhere in the camera. Sorry.
That mic has a placebo effect, so I'm feeling more comfortable. So I would like to give an example from another legislation, another piece of legislation coming from US. Back in 1977, Jimmy Carter administration has launched foreign corrupt and FCPA law, which is foreign corrupt. Exactly. So the whole idea was to prevent US individuals, citizens, or US registered companies to prevent bribing in abroad. And the law is like in nature, two basic factors. One is you have to have the right accounting, and the second one is you will not bribe in the foreign practices or in the foreign countries to influence the business or channel the business towards you. Very basic. Likewise, I mean, most of the US laws, this is a very basic law. But what we have seen in practice, back in 1970s or 80s, there were tiny, small, sanctions implemented, and the law simply was dormant for a long time. And when we come to the 1990s, it became maybe a bit of like political tool, but ultimately, back in 2000, in the year 2000s, they launched the secondary legislation about of this law. So the law, all of a sudden, became very important, and it played an important role in the landscape of the international business, not only for U.S. companies, but for all other companies. So, from business perspective, when one legislation is enforced, I'm coming back to Wolfgang actually. He would like to see some prosecution. He would like to see some execution of the of the laws. So when the laws are enforced, the perception and the importance given to that specific law is very important. So I completely impressed with the new legislation that is implemented in Ukraine. This was discussed, and I'm really impressed the impact to the society, impact of the civil society, and the inclusion of the civil society. But I guess the most important thing is the preparation of the secondary legislations, which is like how are we going to implement this law, and then to bring into the implementation of law. So these are the important parts. And I would like to go back to the initial question where we are in this marathon. I believe we are in the preparation phase. I believe we are now setting the rules of the marathon, and we are mindful about what we're gonna do in each 10 kilometers.
So Ukraine has not even embarked on the marathon yet. Okay. Sergey, over to you. Maybe the comments from Kiev.
Yeah, and I see that Olena Halushka is also would like to,
yes,
to run.
I wanted to actually run in the first round, but I'll join the second round. Well, actually, I would say that we are in the middle on marathon because we started running it in 2014. And please do not forget that we have achieved a lot since then. And 2 points that I would like to mention, that we have this perception paradox when we have very good work of NABU and SAPO, and that they are doing the searches, they are doing detentions, all those things, they make the headlines. And those headlines are, either interpreted as the infrastructure is working well, or they are interpreted hell. There's so much corruption in that country. It's absolutely, worthless continue working with it because it is drowned in corruption. But then comes the case of, consideration in the court, which is not happening overnight. And let me, remind everybody about the Firtash case, where, the guy is in Austria and is basically protecting himself from the American investigation very successfully for almost a decade already, which means that, the convictions are not done overnight. And the convictions and the criminal process, and especially the attorneys that are trying to delay those cases and trying to derail them, they are doing also good job in order to delay justice from being delivered fully. So we have to be very aware of all those things, while we try to remind ourselves about us being just on the very beginning of our fight. Because we have infrastructure, anti-corruption infrastructure in place. We have institutions that are capable of putting behind the bars the head of the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, that's, the guy with the influence in the top 10 in the country by his office, or those who are capable putting behind bars Kolomoisky, or finally break the vicious circle of impunity of judges who always knew that they were covered by their peers and that they are untouchables. So is there something to do with the anti-corruption infrastructure? Yes. And that's something what we are advocating for, that SAPO should have the institutional independence. Some of the provisions are fixed in the parliament, some are not, unfortunately, like the head of the SAPO cannot initiate himself the extradition requests, and he still needs to rely on the Prosecutor's General Office. Lozove's amendments, which I mentioned already, should be revoked fully and not partly, because this is the loophole which oligarchs are abusing. And we really hope that today is Friday, today the parliament can adopt this fully. But that's, the certain loopholes which need to be closed in order to make sure that the infrastructure which is already in place can be working more effectively. But let's take a look at the judicial reform, which from my perspective is a very interesting example in itself, because in 2014-2016, Ukraine tried to implement best European standards. which failed in our country, because we have totally corrupt crooks. And if they receive more independence without being cleaned and without being, dismissed, then the system creates the state inside the state, which cannot be cleaned from the outside. So we made a few steps back. We tested, the new creative approach with the High Anti-Corruption Court, and then we scaled it up with the High Council of Justice and High Qualification Commission of Judges. And we still have to see how they will operate. But the preliminary steps are cautiously optimistic, because they finally approved the list of criteria for the qualification assessment and the dismissal of judges. And they finally introduced integrity criteria there, something which the previous judicial governance bodies completely disregarded. We finally have the real chance to clean the constitutional court. So do we have a lot of the homework to do? Yes, of course. Do we have to fight against oligarchs effectively? Yes, of course. But would the law on lobby resolve this? No. But the law on the anti-monopoly committee, to make it really strong with the competitive selection for the management and maximum independence and institutional capacity, would contribute to that. The real judicial reform to make sure that the oligarchs cannot defend themselves from the anti-corruption infrastructure with the use of non-reformed courts would contribute that. Party financing, strengthening, reporting would also contribute, and a lot of other things, because that's a complicated notion. That's the complicated process which cannot be resolved with just one single law. But what I call on everybody, and maybe I'm a little bit emotional on that, because I had the similar conversation with one Republican congresswoman just 3 weeks ago, when she said that it would be very complicated for her to vote for the supplemental act because Ukraine is utterly corrupt. I mean, we have achieved a lot. We realize what are our problems. We know what is our homework. European Union, IMF, the US have the leverages to help us implement and make those things faster and easier. Let's just do it.
Thank you very much, Elena, for that emotional intervention. I remind everyone that you can signal me that you have some thoughts. Irena, I see you raised your hand, and before I pass the floor to you, I would ask everyone to think of the idea that was in Olena's intervention. Maybe, and it's up to everyone to comment in further intervention, maybe Ukraine meets sometimes too high demands, and maybe we sometimes see that the EU having real corruption in itself, because it's impossible to fight corruption to the very end, as was rightly said before. Maybe some demands to Ukraine are too tough, and even some European countries do not meet them. That was just an idea, and Irina, floor is yours.
Thank you, Sergei. I want to add even more confusion to this marathon analogy that Asia used, and I would even call it a triathlon. We just didn't realize it yet. I think that Ukraine registered for it in 2014 with the Revolution of Dignity, when many people went out on the street and started demanding reforms. And this is where we started to prepare. And as the first start of the triathlon, we started to adopt legislative framework that is helping to set the hard rules and set the infrastructure, the representatives of the many institutions that we have here today in this room, the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, High Anti-Corruption Court. But this is not the end of the Ukraine's fight against corruption, because setting institutions and having the perfect legislation is not enough. And the second stage will be implementation. We will be the showing and seeing these examples of verdicts, convictions, and so on, that set a signal for many in the society that we are ready actually for the final stage. And this is something that Alina talked about more, about the general public, about cultural change, about collective action, about the people who are seeing that to receive a service in Ukraine, they do not need to bribe official. They know that it's not, that they will not lose in this prisoner's dilemma if they will act with the ethics and integrity. And the problem is also, I think, about the perception or general or different perception of what is the finish of this triathlon, because the EU integration or EU accession is not, to my opinion, at least when we are talking about fighting corruption, because there is no country in the EU, but also in the world, that defeated corruption fully. There is every country that's still having its challenges, and we need to talk also about what is our joint perception of EU counterparts and Ukrainian of this finish line in the fighting corruption that Ukraine needs to, or milestone that Ukraine needs to achieve for the European society to be ready to accept Ukraine as its equal member. And I think this is a question or thoughts I would like to ask to our colleagues in Brussels, how you see, what are signals, what are the examples? Because I would be very surprised if I would hear about Lozowy amendments cancelled, which is a very important thing that we are supporting at the EUACI. But I think if we go in the center of Brussels, outside of the room where our colleagues are sitting, and ask the European citizens, what is Ukraine corrupt country? Is Ukraine ready to be? Or what is how Ukraine should look like? They will not mention these legislative changes. They will mention something else. But I would like to hear from the EU colleagues and to share their vision with our Ukrainian counterparts. Thank you.
So just to clarify, your question to Brussels colleagues is...
What is the finish line for in fighting corruption to be ready for the EU accession? Because there's never going to be a finish line in fighting corruption, but at least for the EU accession to be ready to fight with this narrative that Ukraine is too corrupt to be a part of EU, what has to be done? What is your vision?
Thank you so much. I think we will take it from here, Andrei, Sergei. So what is the finish line? I'm looking at the Commission and then the other experts in the room. Do you want to take it, Wolfgang? Yeah.
Look, this is an extremely difficult question because, as you said, corruption is not eradicated completely in any country, and I think it never will be. So from the Commission side, I think our expectation is that Ukraine is doing as much as possible so that we have sustainable results in fighting corruption, and that corruption is limited to a degree that is comparable, I would say, to other EU member states, maybe better than the worst. It doesn't have to be the best. But I think we need confidence that it can really integrate into the Union without creating new problems, without having lots of difficulties.
What would be the comparison? Like, do you have in mind any particular indicator, criteria, how the comparison should work?
I think for us it's really the overall system, and that's why I also so much underlined the track record earlier. We want to see that the system is really working so that corruption is under control. And I think this is then also something that translates for the citizens, because of course they do not look at individual laws. Most of them can hardly point to Ukraine on a map probably. But what is important is if you see that the system is working, that people are arrested, that it's getting seriously addressed, then I think the narrative will simply change. And this is what is important to be successful, to have a narrative change, to really show we are an equal partner for the EU and ready to join. So you can't pinpoint it exactly. I think in the end it is an overall assessment. It's also for the member states to say how they see it. But I think the overall importance is to have practical results to demonstrate that Ukraine is an equal partner.
And let's go to the member states. What member states?
I would like to add my
If you could introduce
yourself. My name is Aisten from Lithuanian delegation to EU. And I work at the Council. We are now in the very intensive process on negotiating the enlargement conclusions and some important decisions to be taken. as well as in the Council and the European Council. And first of all, I think from Lithuanian side, I would just want to congratulate Ukraine on all it has done in the past 2 years and of course previously, but I think that is just incredible, the evidence that we see from the Commission's report and how much can be done if there is a will. The political will it showed to be so important in this process, and I think it related to the war in Ukraine. The professor's word on the person, then the patient, reminded me that actually when we talk about the patient, we forget to say that actually Ukraine is bleeding at the same time. It's not only a patient in terms of fighting corruption or reforming itself, but it is bleeding. It is actually fighting a war. And at the same time, when it is fighting a war, it has shown incredible results. And a lot of thanks to the Commission to making this assessment, the report, enlargement report so objective, because we see that, and even comparing to the other countries, what they have done in the same period of time, you see that the country in the war can do a lot. So that's about the political will. And I think what is important is really to hear from Alena saying that that's important for the society of Ukraine, not only for the integration, because fighting corruption, I come from the country which was former Soviet Union, and that's, we have all this perspective of how important it is for the society. It's not only about the integration into EU. And then we talk about the processes in EU. We should not overestimate, the fight of corruption as the condition. It is a condition. It is in the steps, but at the end, EU takes the decisions based on the objective assessment, but also based on the national interests and internal debates. And well, I'm very optimistic. I want to be optimistic that we will have an important decision this year. But if we have it later on the start of negotiations, the important thing that Ukraine is already on the track. It is in the marathon. It is fighting corruption. It is doing all that is possible in its hands now. So. That's, I mean, the main thing you can do for your country and for your society. And as EU, we have also this responsibility to help you, and we have this responsibility to assist you in all the ways possible. And that's why it's so important that we also adopt the decisions on the financial support to Ukraine, on Ukraine facility, on the military support, and we really hope that those decisions will be done at this level.
Thank you so much, Aiste. And one more comment from Roland.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Roland Pop from Transparency International EU. And yes, first of all, I just want to say once again that Ukraine is doing an amazing job, and the situation that in the middle of the war, you are doing this, that's amazing, and we all should praise this. Another thing I want to mention is there is a big difference between a marathon and what is happening when a society is trying to transform itself, is that once you run a marathon, you've done it. It's done. You had this 42 kilometers and it's great. On the other hand, countries can go backwards and countries can dismantle those institutions which were built up. And unfortunately, what we are seeing right now in the EU is that the EU has its framework, and it's a great system with a lot of problems, of course, of how and in what way it can communicate with candidate countries and what can be asked, what can be achieved, and so on and so forth. Once the member states in the EU, we have seen in a number of cases that things can go really bad, and the EU has some tools, maybe not enough tools, but even the tools they have, they're not using when things are going backtracking. And I think this is also a lesson which the EU is learning right now with some of the member states. And I hope that Ukraine and the Ukrainian society will be more resilient in the future once Ukraine is a member of the EU, of how to make sure that there is no backtracking.
Afterwards.
Yes.
So we have other questions. Okay, what happens after you are in? Maybe here it's good to stop here the discussion in Brussels and go back to Sergey.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. And I address the audience. Are there some comments? Yeah, I see Bogdan on a back row.
Yep, thank you, Sergey. Dear colleagues, my name is Bogdan Kryklevenko. I'm Chief of Staff of Anti-Corruptional Court. So for picking up the topic of marathon or triathlon or whatever, first of all, I try to answer that the Ukraine is not stopped. Ukraine is not walking. Ukraine is running. It's a home task running. It's absolutely true. And just to make some numbers as a showcase about the implementation. Many people say that legislation is not enough, but it's also the frame is like a basic line. It's a fundamental from the starting. We in the court during this year, not the whole year. We have still 3 weeks till the end of this year. The judges of the court deliver a 2 times bigger number of verdicts in this year, how it was before during the 3 years. I mean, saying correct numbers, of the last year, it was more than 30 verdicts in high-profile cases, and this year is already 60 verdicts. It's I don't want to name the names, of course, even the position of the high-level persons, and it was never in the history of Ukraine then you see in the jail so high-level persons, but they in jail already. And when we speak about the implementation, it's of course it's not time to celebrate, but it's really right direction. And once again, we are running, we are not standing. And of course, the delivering justice, it's not cooking of cookies. Sorry for such comparison. It's quite difficult. And specifically in this complicated schemes cases where the person is in very high level of resources and influence to hide their bad actions. So it's objectively takes a time, and we will show additional result that how Olena told it in the beginning. So everyone in Ukraine aware that it's not a task for EU or US or another international partners. It's our home task for Ukraine and Ukrainians, and we of course will do our best. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bogdan, do you have some specific questions also, or it's only an intervention?
No, we in the court, we have no questions. We know what to do.
You have answers.
Yes, we have answers to many questions, but it's take the time. Yes.
Yeah, very shortly, Tina, if you allow, because I see that Olena would like to intervene shortly.
Yeah, I have a very short question to Mr. Nozer, if I may. How do you plan to engage civil society for the reform consultations throughout all of the further stages of the EU accession process?
Sergey, shall we go ahead?
The floor is yours. It's a question to Mr. Nozer.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I see 2 main parts of civil society engagement. On the one hand, we regularly pass very strong messages to the Ukrainian authorities, where we underline the importance of proper stakeholder consultations, where we really encourage them to include civil society as much as possible. The second track for us is direct consultation of civil society. For example, for our annual enlargement package, when we collect the facts on our report, we reach out to civil society, invite them partially to provide written input, partially also to give us some oral insights. So for us, it's really important that these both tracks are further strengthened in the continuation of the process, so that we on the Commission side have the full spectrum of information, but that also on the decision-making side in Ukraine, that there is a broad basis for these decisions to be made.
Sure. Can I check, as we are still speaking, Brussels is speaking, can I check other comments and questions in the room? Alina, maybe?
I just want to make a comment, I mean, to use the previous example that we have of cooperation and verification mechanisms for Romania and Bulgaria, just in order to give some idea of what you should expect. This started with a limited number of benchmarks that these countries were supposed to fulfill. They signed basically the accession treaty, but this remained like the clause, which could have been activated afterwards if they did not keep their promises on corruption. But what I saw happening, and this was supposed to last for 3 years, and I think that in the end it lasted for like 12, 13 years, and the benchmarks also changed. 4 or 5 years ago, I noticed that the benchmark was added to Romania, which said the total eradication of corruption in every local municipality or something like this. And by these standards, you know, Belgium should not be a member of the European Union. So, you know, expect that this will change. This is really a political tool. That's not a precise tool where somebody will have clear indicators. You fulfill these indicators and you're going to be done. Indicators are going to shift according to the political situation. And I think the advice that Wolfgang gave you to have always the winning narrative, which is whatever we're doing it more at 200% than requirement, it's probably the best solution, because in the end of the day, it is really a PR game. But what I would advise you as someone who survived and assisted reforms in many countries is that in parallel to this, you do have a real plan. You do have a real plan on how to change your country, because yes, surely you have to be in EU, but also surely you won't have another opportunity in this tragedy that you're living, but there will not be another opportunity in your history where you can fundamentally change the power structure of these countries and change your Soviet legacy than now.
Thank you very much. Alina, over to you, Sergei, for the final thoughts and questions from Kyiv.
Thank you. And if I may, I would like to focus on what Alina said, because it also reflects my previous thought that sometimes maybe Ukraine meets higher demands than other current EU member states have. Could anyone in Brussels studio or in Kyiv studio comment on the idea what should change to fix this issue? What can Ukraine do? What can, I don't know, authorities do, civil society? What can Brussels do, maybe in fighting propaganda? So to find a core of this problem and to tackle it. So maybe as we are here in our studio, if someone would like to comment on this here, and we will pass this to Brussels too. Difficult question, I see. So maybe it's for Brussels.
It's a complex. I can already maybe pinpoint several things. Alina already mentioned inventory, taking from inventory, going through it. Let's see what's happening. Then another point raised by Wolfgang, it was about that the whole system is changed. But I had a question on that, maybe to you, Wolfgang. It's a good time to ask. How would the EU measure a change of the system? What would be for you the indicator that you can say that the system has changed? Wolf?
Well, I mean, during the accession negotiations, we of course monitor the reform progress in Ukraine, and we look, of course, on the one hand, what has been adopted in terms of legislation. That's for me the starting point. The legislation has to be right. So we try to make sure that loopholes are closed as much as possible, and the legislation is in line with the EUACI. But then we also look at implementation, and we look at the practical results, and the track record, sorry to come back to that again, is for us is one of these examples where we can very clearly see, is it working or not? Is there more prosecutions? Is there more final convictions? And so for us, it's really this package we look at. And this is why I'm always a little bit skeptical about individual indicators. They might tell you something of a part of the system, but you really have to look at the whole system to make a thorough assessment. And I think this is also why I said earlier, the accession negotiations are a big package, and you can't just focus on one element of it. but really fully engage in the whole package and make sure it works. This will help you with the EU accession process, but also with the broader reform process in Ukraine. And I think this is what counts in the end, the real results for citizens, for businesses, for investors. That's the crucial point here.
Any other comments from the room? How do we see the change in the system? What is the core issue Ukraine should address? Before we close the discussion.
We have a number of change indicators, okay? So we have a number of change indicators. The thing is that indicators that we use to compare across countries, they're not granular enough for one country, okay? The change indicators is my forecast page, which covers 120 countries. It will be published, renewed with forecast for 2024 next week. And I can tell you that over the last 10 years, Ukraine did not change on judicial independence and did not change on freedom of the press, which is great news because 80% of the world, and in particular transition countries, regressed on that score. And it progressed only on capacity of civil society, what we call digital citizens, and on online services offered by government. Everything else stayed largely as it was, and therefore, actually, we are going to give Ukraine the flag of a country improving despite the war. While last year it had lost half the score in the index because they were closing down a lot of transparent websites due to the war. Now they put back a part of them, and I really think that I do see, given the condition, a positive trend. Now, the other important things are the one on the single market public procurement scoreboard. In particular, single bidding. We don't have fantastic indicators, but if there is a universal indicator, and which will be important during reconstruction, it will be competitiveness of procurement. We really have massive evidence that single bidding procurement, apparently competitive procurement, but only where only one bidder steps forward, is corrupt. It is because, you know, people know who's gonna win or the terms are. I mean, use that. We now have developed at UNODC, we have a commission of experts, and we have developed now with the endorsement of 120 countries, the first objective framework which we ask statistical offices of countries to measure from now on to assess corruption, right? I can tell you what's in it. For instance, there are administrative sanctions for corruption. Prior to sending someone in jail, which will take you 4, 5, 6 years, and then he may, like President Lula in Brazil, win elections and overturn all his convictions, try to prevent, all right, number of times, number of irregularities found by audits and which were followed by administrative consequences. How many people were dismissed because they had reports of corruption? Dismissed. You don't need to put people in jail because you cannot put the number of people in jail that you can put in jail. You just need to put the few people to prove immunity culture.
If we could save some for the second discussion. Thank you so much. I'm just aware of the time constraints. We are running out of time. So I think this is it, Sergey, from our side.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's also finally meets our agenda. So we are over with first panel. A first panel turns to be quite a sportive one. So we have got a good marathon here, and I really enjoyed the discussion. And after a coffee break, during which Ukrainian and Brussels part would be disunited because we will have coffee separately. We will have a chance to discuss all of that, and we would be happy to see you in half an hour or
half
as
an
far
hour
as I remember. Yeah, so thank you and see you.
Thank you. See you. the live stream. Yeah.
This time, Brussels is first.
Sure. Welcome back to everybody, and welcome back to our roundtable, Kyiv and Brussels, Fighting Corruption, Ukraine's Path to the EU. Just in case there are some people joining us just from now on Facebook or on YouTube, let me briefly say that this is the event organized by the Center for European Policy Studies and European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative. My name is Tina Akhledi, and I am Research Fellow here at CEPS in Brussels, and the roundtable in Kyiv is moderated by Sergei Sidorenko, European Pravda. As agreed with you, so this time, the second session, we will kick off from Brussels, from CEPS, and just to liaise with the previous session. So previously we talked where Ukraine stands in terms of implementing anti-corruption reforms, where it stands in terms of its European integration. Now, what we want to zoom in this time is where European Union stands itself in terms of fighting the corruption, what is really on top of its agenda in this direction, and how can the EU share its best practices to Ukraine. So I'm very happy that today I have with me Cornel Deschamps, who is representing the European Commission, DG Home. And I would like to kick off this discussion with you, Cornel. Get us on the stage where the EU stands, what are the news in its legislation and policies, and what can the EU share to Ukraine as its best practice?
No, thank you very much for this and for the opportunity to also speak here. So I will just briefly speak a bit about what we are currently doing from the European Commission side as regards EU policy and legislation to update the fight against corruption. I mean, I don't want to come back to the marathon metaphor that was used earlier, but the marathon is also a marathon where the route is constantly changing while you're doing it, as the EUACI, the EU legislation, continuously gets updated. This is also true for corruption, so there's important changes ongoing that will also be very relevant for Ukraine in the future. Now, why are we changing our legislation, for example? Well, it's because, in fact, currently the EU legislation is quite outdated as such, because technically only bribery, only the crime of bribery is criminalized across the EU. For other types of corruption, there's no real specific legislation in general. We rely mainly on international standards, or we have the area of the protection of the EU's financial interests, where we have very extensive legislations and strong protections. You might have heard of the European Public Prosecutor's Office or OLAF, for example. But corruption, of course, goes broader than that, and that's the area where, for now, we're a bit behind the curve, let's say. So our Commission President made a number of key commitments to go further in this fight against corruption. She already did this in her 2022 State of the Union speech, so by now that is a year and a half ago. But of course, this was further strengthened by the whole infamous Qatargate corruption scandal, which by now everyone has heard about, and it's 1 year ago this day. And this really showed to us that we wanted to take a step forward also on EU level and further improve what we're doing. So that's why we came last year in May, on 3 May, with an anti-corruption package from the European Commission, which consists of 3 parts, and I will just briefly go through them. So we had a communication, and this is basically a document that sets out what the Commission, what the EU is doing in the fight against corruption, and what we're looking towards in the future. In this communication, we had, let's say, a few important elements. In particular, we set up an EU network against corruption, where we're trying to gather everyone who's doing something on corruption, avoid fragmentation, just trying to get everyone together for a discussion more closely on what is corruption, on how can we prevent it, repress it, and how everyone can better work together. We've had so far 1 edition of this network, which has been a very good step forward. The communication also sets out what we want to do in the future. And one important step in this is that we want to map what are the really high-risk areas on corruption across the EU. This is critical for us because this is an exercise that lots of countries already do, but they do it nationally. So what we want to do is we want to take it a step higher and look at EU level, what is going on here, what are the areas we need to focus on as the EU institutions. And finally, all of this work, for the first time, we have a commitment to look forward to an EU anti-corruption strategy, which is something we wanted to move towards for years, but so far we have not managed to. This will finally be a decision of the next College of Commissioners, but it's already an important commitment that we will look into it and have anchored that also in this communication. And then the second part of this anti-corruption package is the directive on combating corruption. This is a legislative proposal from the Commission, so it's still under discussion by the legislators, so the member states in the Council and the European Parliament. But that's really a directive where we want to anchor the fight against corruption more deeply in EU legislation. So it means we're updating criminal offenses, and including the sanctions that are linked to them, adding more sanctions, more offenses than bribery, such as trading in influence, abuse of functions, misappropriation, all these issues. We're also adding an important aspect of prevention of corruption. Inducing member states to raise awareness on corruption, to publish statistics they have on corruption cases, so we can compare them, to try and hold the public sector accountable to higher standards. And finally, we're also trying to ensure effective investigations and prosecution in this directive by removing barriers. For example, we focus on the statute of limitations. We focus on rules on immunity of members of parliament, focus on the police and investigators having the necessary investigative tools. So it's a big package and still under negotiation, so we hope we come there soon. We'll stop here, but I'm happy to go into discussion on other initiatives we have. But these were the two main important aspects of it.
Thank you very much, Bernal, for getting us on the speed. And let me now move to Roland Papp, who is Senior Policy Officer, Illicit Financial Flows Transparency International EU. So perspectives from you where the EU stands?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, in this conference, I would like to start with saying that it's when we talk about Ukraine and the EU, we shouldn't have this idea that the EU is a perfect place where we are already smart and clean and successful in this fight, whereas we need to teach those Ukrainians how to fight corruption. It's absolutely not the case. The Ukrainians themselves know what they are fighting for. They're literally dying for this. They're dying for European values. And to be honest, in many sense, Ukraine is much better than some of the EU member states. For example, when it comes to beneficial ownership, transparency and availability, or public procurement, it has been mentioned in the previous panel. Many member states are waivers than Ukraine, or the e-declaration system. I mean, it's not perfect in Ukraine what was adopted, but compared to some countries where you have handwritten paper scanned, and that's the declaration, asset declaration, that's a big difference, I would say. And indeed, it was mentioned, now we have the first anniversary of a Qatargate when police found suitcases full of cash. So this is the European landscape. And I believe that is a journey which we are in, and Ukraine is in it too as well. And we shouldn't feel that we are much better than that. There's a lot to do, and a lot of it is going on. As Cornel just mentioned, the anti-corruption directive. I believe this is a very important and good proposal. Of course, it just sets minimum standards, but it is very important, as it was mentioned. Some other points I would like to highlight is that including public and private sector as well. This is a key point which is lacking in many places. Then the aggravating circumstances, to have that there in this legal framework, or just the minimum sentences for corruption. I mean, we know that it must be important because Prime Minister Fico of Slovakia just about to reverse some of it in his new government just after taking seat. There's, of course, a couple of things missing in this directive, which we as a civil society organization would be very happy to see. One point is, what about the victims of corruption? Sometimes we tend to think corruption as a crime without victims, but it's actually not the case. And it would be important to include victims from the very early on till the very end, even when it comes to some kind of compensation. The other point, preventative measures. Yes, indeed, there is some language in that, but we believe that this directive is not going far enough, and there's a lot more which can be added. Especially one point is undue influence, undue foreign and other influence, malign influence, I might say, and how to try to tackle with that in some ways and forms in all member states. which is a very interesting question because it was also mentioned at the previous panel, lobby rules and something which the European Commission is expecting Ukraine to do to reach the European standards when it comes to lobby and come forward with the new legislation. But I must say that at this point, at the EU level, there are no European standards for lobbying. So we might ask something from Ukraine which doesn't even exist in the EU at the first place. And that's a tricky problem, and we understand that it is important to fight against influence of oligarchs in Ukraine, for example, but that shouldn't go in a direction which at the end reaches rather like shrinking space and goes against the inclusion of stakeholders in civil society instead of really a transparent way of lobbying and creating such a system, which there is also a risk right now in the European Union. We have heard a lot about foreign agents laws in Georgia, in Hungary. The Commission rightly so took Hungary to the court. There are discussions about that in Republika Srpska in Bosnia. And unfortunately, it seems that the EU also has this appetite for that because this new upcoming defense of democracy package might end up in a way which really makes this discussion and labels people as foreign agents instead of creating a comprehensive rule for all stakeholders and have clear rules on that for all member states. And this, if this would happen in the EU, that would be great, and that can be asked from Ukraine to do. But right now, it might not be the case.
Thank you very much, Ron. These are very, I think, good and clear messages. And I think it will be very interesting to hear a bit later on what Kyiv thinks about what you just said. But before we move to the Kyiv Roundtable, I would like to invite David Dolidze, who is Senior Legal Advisor, Group of States Against Corruption, to share his views.
Thank you. Thank you for having the Secretariat of GRECO at this roundtable. I will try to offer an external perspective on how the EU could help Ukraine, how it could support Ukraine in EU integration in terms of anti-corruption. I will speak probably changing hats, or rather, first of all, I will provide very briefly a rather technical summary of where Ukraine stands with the evaluation by GRECO. And then I will have to speak on my personal behalf, in my personal capacity, because I have no mandate to make political statements here as a representative of the Secretariat of GRECO. But nonetheless, there were some very interesting points made by previous speakers, which I'd like to echo. So GRECO is the Group of States Against Corruption, which is the monitoring body of the Council of Europe that's placed in Strasbourg. The Council of Europe has 46 member states. GRECO is open to any other country. And apart from the 46, it also has Kazakhstan and United States of America as its members. It evaluated Ukraine in the fourth round in 2017. The fourth round is a jargon. It basically covers corruption prevention among members of parliament, judges and prosecutors. And then GRECO has a formal compliance procedure where it follows up on what each member state has done to implement recommendations. The very latest compliance report on Ukraine was adopted in March this year. It's public. Anyone can consult it on GRECO website. We read here that out of 31 recommendations that GRECO gave to Ukraine, 15 have been fully implemented and 9 have been partly implemented, and the remaining ones are still to be implemented. Now, in the March report, GRECO particularly recognized the strong commitment by Ukraine at an extremely difficult time for the member state following the war of aggression by the Russian Federation. And it noted very significant progress in many areas which recommendations addressed. These include, by the way, the issue of transparency of lobbying, because the Council of Europe has a legal instrument on that, which is part and parcel of GRECO's monitoring. The report notes that a law on lobbying is yet to be adopted, so indeed there is the need for that law is recognized here as well. GRECO is also preparing, when the circumstances allow, to carry out the evaluation of Ukraine under the fifth round, and the fifth round of GRECO evaluation focuses on corruption prevention in top executive functions, that would be the government, and in law enforcement. So as soon as circumstances allow, we are ready to go there. To sum up this sort of bureaucratic part of what I'd like to say, the progress is there. There is political will, very clearly, to carry on with reforms and with changes, and we can only welcome and encourage Ukraine to do more. Now I'm taking off my civil servant hat, and I can't help but mention a few words in general about the current situation and current challenges that Ukraine is facing, but also the Europe and the West in general is facing in this adversity, in this war that is going on. There are probably three words which I'd like to use. First is sovereignty, second is transformation, and third is resilience. When we speak of sovereignty, we saw that in 2013, at the end of 2013 actually, Ukrainian people chose to break away definitely with the Soviet past and with the culture of corruption, and they showed preparedness to transform and preparedness to have the government that actually reflects what people want, and people want to be a flourishing European democracy. And for that, Ukraine first was challenged, its sovereignty was challenged with the annexation of Crimea and with the crackdowns on manifestations, etc. Now the key point here is for Ukraine to maintain and strengthen its sovereignty, which is why the ongoing war and the preparedness of Ukrainians to put their lives on the line for the choice they have made back in 2014 should not be underestimated and should be clearly seen. The second point, which is transformation, I'd like to sympathize very much with what Professor Mungiu Pipidi explained. It's not about reform simply, it's about changing of who we are. It's about building a culture of zero tolerance to corruption, and that is not a sports competition. That is not something that you can start and that you can finish and get the prize and enjoy it. It really is a constant process. And in this respect, I'd like to quote one of the latest statements of the president of GRECO, which is in the annual report. He speaks of agencies asking him, telling him that they're looking to create a mentality of zero tolerance to corruption, and he's asked how this can be done. Well, he says there is no simple answer to this. Political will and leadership are clearly key ingredients, along with education, and the battle against corruption should start early, and it's never going to end. We have to always remain vigilant, and we have to always be in the process of continuous transformation, so that corruption and informal networks are not something that we are used to and we have to cope with, but they become something that are simply unacceptable. And the third word which I mentioned was, I think, resilience, and resilience relates exactly to that. Once Ukraine becomes member of the EU, it doesn't mean that the challenges posed by corruption are over. Quite the contrary. Professor mentioned that many of the countries, once having achieved that goal, they simply relinquished the commitments, they relinquished the efforts. So that is certainly a risk. And finally, on resilience, I should say that on the way here in the train, I was reading this article in The Economist, which made a lot of havoc on social media about how Europe should react and how what the West should do to actually support Ukraine. This article made me think that it's existential crisis not just for Ukraine, but for the free world in general. And the article says that a conviction should be there that Ukraine will emerge from the war as a thriving European democracy. And it also calls Europe for greater political action. Now, we see that the resolve to support Ukraine within the EU is there. It's absolutely adequate. And personally, I think that the same resolve should be shown by each individual member state of the EU. And there should be just adequate apprehension of the risks that are at stake, for which Ukrainians are consciously putting their lives today in the fight for freedom and in the fight for their choice to be part of the European civilization of democratic states. So I'll stop here, but I'm happy to provide any further inputs if necessary.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing all these insights, quite broad. Thanks a lot. Just to briefly wrap up before I move to Sergey. So EU's legislation is outdated very much. EU is in the process of drafting, revising it. Ukraine can be actually better mapped than some of the EU member states. And then Ukraine's progress deserves quite some praise from the Greco, and also the three key words that we can remember: sovereignty, transformation, and resilience, all steered around existential crisis from David's comments. So this is a wrap from here. Over to you, Sergey, and yeah, what Kyiv wants to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. And it happened that even in Kyiv, as Kyiv is quite integrated into the EU, we also have some voices from the EU. And on this words, I would like to pass the floor to Žydrūnas Bartkus, former director of Special Investigation Service of Republic of Lithuania, who's been serving on that position for 10 years or like that. And he definitely knows how difficult is that to reform post-Soviet country and to fight corruption there. Maybe you can share some thoughts and some recipes.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. And as you mentioned, 10 years in Special Investigation Service. It's not true, because I started 24 years ago in work in Special Investigation Service and finished as a director of this service March of this year. So I spent 24 years in anti-corruption field. And it's quite interesting because Special Investigation Service was established in Lithuania in 1997. And you should know that in 1995, it was EU-Lithuanian Association Agreement signed, and it was like recommendation for Lithuania to establish anti-corruption institution. And in 1997, the institution was established, and this institution was established only for investigation corruption crimes, and it was under the Ministry of Interior. After EU negotiations started, it was like recommendation for Lithuania to increase independence of anti-corruption institution. And quite soon, in 2000, it was new law on Special Investigation Service adopted, and I already worked in this institution, and I can remember that Lithuania was looking for the best model, how to deal with corruption in the country. And we analyzed all models of different countries, and we took model of Hong Kong, EUACI, and still 2000, Lithuania's Special Investigation Service is working in 3 directions. It means that corruption prevention, investigation, and anti-corruption and awareness raising. And it was like possible to deal in these directions in Lithuania. And it was like 2000 or this time it was like a beginning of fighting, real fighting corruption. What was like obstacle? For most of society and politicians, it was like everything already is done. The institution was established, so institution is responsible for fighting corruption. But it's not enough, and it was like understood. And in 2002, new corruption prevention law was adopted, and first national anti-corruption strategy was signed in Parliament. But Lithuania joined the European Union in 2004. And it was very, very well mentioned that like joining European Union or NATO, it is like a finish line for marathon. And it's very important to think how to keep running. And Lithuania is quite a good example that after joining the European Union, we had quite silent period till, I guess, 2014 or 2015. Special Investigation Service was doing his job, and we had quite similar obstacles like Ukraine's NABU and SAPO has here. We had strange decisions of Constitutional Court. We had strange amendments in our laws regulated Special Investigation Service. It was post-Soviet country, it was similar problems what Ukraine has. But Special Investigation Service became stronger. Special Investigation Service had possibility to work at the same, like in these directions. And after each bigger case, we analyzed reasons why corruption happened. We provided recommendations for ministries, for government, for parliament, and it was quite good political will to change like rules of game. And I would like to mention some significant changes what was made in Lithuania recently. It was like after close to 20 years, it was decided that old corruption prevention model is not work effectively. And it was changed in 2021. And what was put in this law that now in Lithuania, each head of institution, as mayor, minister, or directors of different institutions, are responsible for building anti-corruption environment within institutions. It's not now duty of Special Investigation Service or for someone from the side. They are responsible, and we had like a small house in the country because a lot of heads said, okay, I would like, but I'm specialist of, for example, healthcare or agriculture, and I don't know how to do that. And it was offered like a virtual platform, Integrity Academy, and it is still effective tool in Lithuania. And we invited integrity officers from these institutions where anti-corruption environment already was built. And we asked them to share their experience. And they was happy to do that. They was happy to share. And another one step, we invited institutions to participate in this Integrity Academy. And we paired like mentors, these integrity officers, with institutions and started the process. Before starting, we had created methodology how to assess what situation is in the institution, and started work. And now we have in Lithuania, I checked numbers today, 58 institutions participating in this Integrity Academy. We have 44 mentors, like integrity officers who is sharing their experience. We had 36 like webinars, online webinars, in which took part 11,000 public officials totally. And we expanded like activity from the public service. We invited private service to participate with the same model. And last amendment was we invited teachers. Teachers, but not particular teachers, but all teachers to participate, because word of teacher for kid is very, very important. Not cross road on red. It could be said by math, by other teacher, and it's important for kids. So teachers are quite active in Lithuania. Another one, it's very important how to engage in heads of institutions to create to pay attention to that. We created like system of measurement, how to measure like level of corruption of institution and progress achieved per year. And we made these results public, and it is now like a anti-corruption race. For example, for our 60 municipalities and for 14 ministries to look better and better and to show like anti-corruption progress in time period. So there are other changes, but what I would like to summarize that what is important for successful anti-corruption activity is collective action. Collective action, not to become fragmented, and not to let anti-corruption ecosystem work alone. Everyone should be involved. Second one is political will. It's very important to have not a political will to start fighting corruption, but to keep running all the time and to have this strong political will, not from the society only, not from the bottom of institutions, but from top leaders of the country. Third one is anti-corruption ownership, that not anti-corruption institutions should be responsible and should have like willingness to fight corruption, but heads of institutions should be responsible for that. Integrity officers, and I'm happy in Lithuania, strongest integrity officers and anti-corruption environment now is in state-owned enterprises, not in public service, but state-owned enterprises are the leaders in anti-corruption environment. And finally, measurement. We should know how successful we are. So nice to be here and nice to participate in this event. Thank you.
Many thanks, and now it's time to reflect for Ukrainian participants. Ivan Nagornyak, advisor to the Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Ivan, I would ask you to share not your experience of corruption in the EU, but raise the experience of whose help is the most useful for Ukraine? Because I can imagine that, for instance, I don't know, Dutch experience in fighting corruption may be sometimes not that much relevant, or maybe I can make mistake in that.
Thank you very much. Thanks to organizers for inviting me. I would like to start from a very short story. I started my work as a civil servant in 2013 in the regional state administration, and we had there even the special unit fighting corruption and preventing corruption. And there was special units in all of the local administrations also that were directly responsible for prevention of corruption. But in 2013, the situation was with fighting corruption was very bad. And as you may know, the European Union with this soft power, this transformative power, encouraged Ukrainian society to stand for what President of Ukraine said, the European way of life. And we believe that this European way of life is much less corruption, is much more transparency in economical life. That's why I think the European Union is so important for Ukrainians. And I think that all of you have mentioned the what was the assessment of the European Union, European Commission of Ukraine's progress over the chapter 23-24 in the enlargement package report. We made good progress in chapter 23 and limited progress in chapter 24. There is a causes why, but in any case, we made good progress in filling these 7 political steps, and third step regarding the fighting corruption and strengthening the anti-corruption institutions really helped us to encourage all of the political actors to work on that field. And as you may notice, we made good progress, and I think that in the coming days there will be a positive voting in the Verkhovna Rada over the draft laws that are very important for fighting corruption and for strengthening the NABU, SAPO, and other national anti-corruption prevention agency. So I believe that this transformative, this soft power is the most important support for Ukraine for fighting corruption. Without this encouragement, without this political positive decisions from the European side, it will be much more harder for us to stay on that track. Secondly, I would like also to say big thank you words for the EUACI initiative. They supported directly governmental office with the advice. People like Zdranos are working with us right now on the coordination of this our activities for fighting corruption. And we believe that with this help, with implementation of the national anti-corruption program, with future forming of the national program of adoption of acquis and preparation for the accession negotiations and so on, this support will only rise, and we believe that this gonna bring a lot of good results for Ukraine, for Ukrainian society, and as I said, for bringing more European way of life here in Ukraine, in Kyiv. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Very shortly, if you can add on. So focus on EU as an incentive, as a soft power is very important. But do you see that experience of some EU countries is really relevant to Ukraine?
Well, we are working very closely with experience of Lithuania, so I think that probably we will take this experience as the I would say the main one. But of course, there are a lot of good practices in different fields of fighting corruption. So we cannot just put one and go straight on that line, but we have to learn from other good experiences. So
yeah. Many thanks. Irina Shiba, finally we've got our hosts. Deputy Head of the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative. Irina, you already had some say on the first panel, but on the second, I would ask you to focus on the EU experience compared to Ukraine one, because now we are mainly talking about the EU focus. So you definitely have some comparative analysis and so on. Why do we stand compared to the EU countries when it comes to fighting corruption and when it comes to corruption?
Really not an easy question to answer, and I think this is perhaps inspired by many skepticism that you sometimes hear in Ukraine saying. And we started this discussion. We will just switch the microphone, colleagues.
Sounds better. Yeah.
You see, not only EUACI is supporting the governmental office is supporting the EUACI. And I think this is how the cooperation and exchange is working out between the EU and Ukraine. We are not anymore in 2014 when many EU experts the lessons learned are passing the knowledge. We are at the point when Ukraine has already a lot of lessons learned, sometimes on its own mistakes, sometimes on successes. But it's a dialogue and it's exchange of experiences that help us to grow. And we at the EUACI, we serve as a liaison office for this cooperation and for this communication. We bring experts from EU to Kyiv, and we're grateful for them to come in here in the terms of the missile attacks and the hardship that many Ukrainians are facing, and showing the shoulder and support that they can provide here also physically. Because we can't be anymore as capacity building projects as just as the coaches standing and watching these people running the marathons, but we need to actually run with them. We need to be open about the challenges the new challenges that the war brought also to the fight in corruption. It's lack of people, lack of resources. Many of the detectives, judges, prosecutors went to the front lines to defend the country and its democracy with the arms, with their arms and with the guns in their hands, instead of the documents and the draft laws that they were working on before. So we also, while they're doing their job there, we are here to support and do the job with them. And my colleagues from DG Home said that maybe, and Greco, that maybe it's also the existential crisis or existential questions for the EU, how to support Ukraine better in this environment, and this is why we're having this discussion right now. So our approach being for many years that we focus on capacity building, we provide the training, we provide the analysis and expertise, and we see results of that. We see those verdicts, those convictions, those big cases that create the perception paradox about which Olena Halushka said, because with one hand, you see the institutions being effective in investigating and corruption and bringing it to justice, but from the perception of Ukrainians and EU citizens, sometimes it seems like corruption even became bigger because they haven't seen it before. They haven't seen these evidences. They couldn't imagine the sizes of bribes of cases. So for them, sometimes it creates impression that situation got worse after all of these years of fighting corruption. So is it really a case? We are here a more positive and hopefully being backed by also by academia, that when you have actually bringing to the light those situations and showing how big is corruption when they start, it sometimes, yes, creates a perception that it's bigger, but our assessment, it's more the effective work of institutions and the results of their work. But we might criticize, and I know many criticize the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index because it's not about the real corruption, it's about perception. But at the same time, it is perception and the narratives that form the reality, that form our life and guide us in our decisions, because many Ukrainian citizens still propose bribes or do not receive the services because they think that they will be asked for a bribe. Even though corruption might have been eliminated in some sectors, people are not receiving the services that they should have received because they are worried or they are afraid to go and receive the services. And I've asked the question for the vision of the EU and how they will know the Ukraine met the finish line. And for me, is vision it looks like this, seeing the person who's saying on the street to somebody who violated his or her rights that I'm going to sue you. And it's not going to sound like a joke, because they will believe that they can defend their rights if somebody violates them in the court without the bribe. Because many Ukrainians are not even going to the courts right now because they don't believe that they can get justice in these courts. And this is why we also need to work not just with capacity building, but with the perception, with communication, organizing events like this, which sometimes might seem too expensive or meaningless. But I think it's also about creating and showing by physical presence, by this discussion, that we are working on these issues, we are acknowledging them, and we're working on them together. And since also Zdrunas mentioned the work with schools and with students, I want to just add a small line on that, because we at the EUACI are very proud to support the Integrity Office of the NACP. We've supported them in development of a set of recommendations on transparency and integrity of secondary schools. And we're now providing trainings for directors of schools in different cities, how to work with the children, how to also be an example for them. So to act in integrity way and to show that they can defend their rights, and that they show that the educational process is forming them in their values and preparing them for their future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina. And as this panel is led by Brussels, I'm happy to pass the floor back to Tina.
Thank you so much, Sergey. This was very insightful for us to hear the perspectives and views from Kyiv. I'm back to the roundtable to Brussels, and I want to double check with the speakers who would like to follow up. I see already Cornel has the follow-up comments.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all the insightful contributions. I just wanted to quickly follow up on 3 points, or highlight 3 points that I really liked in these interventions. So mostly, first of all, also to highlight the work that the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative does in Kyiv. I mean, it's really quite impressive, and we're happy to support that. I think there, the enthusiasm and the will that is apparent in Ukraine to fight corruption is very important to underline. Because if we look at some EU member states, for example, internally, it's not always the case, or sometimes the fight against corruption is not such a big priority, as also was mentioned by Roland. And it's great to see that there's really this will to go further in this process, and that's something important to maintain and to keep going forward. And this links to my second point, to also please share your best practices with us where you have them. I mean, there's indeed some very impressive systems in Ukraine, especially IT systems that help in this prevention of corruption in particular, that would be very useful in EU member states. So that's also something to highlight. Likewise, the other way around, I mean, of course, it's also great to see your cooperation with Lithuania and the STT, who have a lot of experience in this field. so they can also certainly share much with you. And then finally, I just want to go a bit deeper on the role of the EU and the European Commission as this standard setter in the fight against corruption. I mean, I think that's certainly true. We do have a number of practices that can be very, very helpful for you and that you can move towards adopting. But we're not alone in this. Like, we operate in an environment also where the Greco colleagues have an important role. The role of the OECD is also very important in the prevention of corruption. To highlight, for example, on lobbying, indeed, we don't have an EU law on lobbying as such, but there we rely on these standards that are adopted by these bodies like Greco and like the OECD, also to evaluate your lobbying law, for example, when it will arrive. So that's just to say, don't look at the Commission, the European Commission, just as a vacuum. We don't always have the full truth either, so we're also exchanging with our partners and our international colleagues to create the best anti-corruption environment possible.
Thank you, Cornel. And before I move to other speakers, just to make sure we understand, would you say that there is sufficient tools and mechanisms between EU and Ukraine to share the best practices? Because you said it's important to share practices also from Ukraine. Do we have enough, cooperation on that?
I think there's a lot of fora, and I've also exchanged with Ukraine colleagues, for example, in fora of Greco or OECD, where I already start seeing that they're there and starting to share their experience. For example, last year at the Global Anti-Corruption Forum of the OECD, there were very insightful presentations from Ukrainian colleagues. Of course, it can always be better, and I know our colleagues from DG NIR, Wolfgang, who was here before, they have a lot of financial assistance and projects that they're rolling out, including the strengthening of the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative. So I'm sure it will only improve in the future, hopefully.
Thank you. Any other comments in the room before we go back? Can I go to Simon? Simon, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Simon van der. I'm a journalist for Follow the Money. We're an investigative news platform focusing on, among other topics, fraud and corruption. And it has been mentioned by Roland of Transparency International that indeed 1 year ago, Brussels was shocked by this Qatargate corruption scandal. I mean, it's pretty far from Ukraine, and you have many other things to worry about. But this was a big thing in Brussels, and so we've been looking in the wake of this scandal a bit at how corruption is being tackled in at the heart of the European Union. And I have to say, I used to be a marathon runner myself a long time ago, and used to be quite fit back then. Now I became lazy and envious of these fit athletes, but I think similarly the EU should not lay back, or some member states, but also some of the oldest member states, thinking that indeed corruption is not a problem anymore, and can learn, I think, from the enthusiasm and dynamism that Ukraine is currently showing, and other Eastern European member states where this struggle is more lively still, although admittedly the levels of corruption and bribery are quite different, we should say. But so we've been looking at enforcement specifically of corruption, and I think we noticed a big problem there in Brussels, also at the Belgian judicial system, which deals with quite some of these cases that involve European officials. And I think what we see there is that it's very difficult to bring people to justice. So there are more or less 3 levels of impunity is a strong word, but at least of a lack of enforcement. The first is the European institutions themselves, who are confronted with these problems, are sometimes a little lenient. For instance, the European Parliament, we saw that there are many cases of misuse of allowances for assistance of members of the European Parliament. Only a small fraction of those cases are sent to prosecutors, and there are some question marks about the procedures that the European Parliament uses in sending those cases to prosecutors. But then even cases that are sent to prosecutors, we see a very low indictment rate. And this has a lot to do, on the one hand, with OLAF, the European Anti-Fraud Office, which also investigates corruption internal of EU institution officials, which can investigate. Sometimes these investigations take very long, and afterwards they send recommendations which are not binding or have little probative value in court. So it basically means that the prosecutors have to do it all over again often. And another problem is the statute of limitations. So when prosecutors get these cases from OLAF, which have been going on often for at least 3 years, they see the statute of limitations risk expiring and they don't open an investigation, because I believe the OLAF statistics are that from in the past 5 years of the 270 recommendations sent to prosecutors, only 33 indictments were there. And then of these cases, then the latest stages in court, we see a lot of expiry of the statute of limitations, and also a low appetite on the side of prosecutors and courts to deal with these cases quickly. I mean, other cases are often more sexy, like terrorism cases, or corruption and fraud are very often very complex, and sometimes considered boring by police forces and prosecutors. So, to sum up, I think indeed the EU has some tasks for itself, and I think we can all also learn from the dynamism that Ukraine is currently showing.
Thank you very much, Simon. I've recorded one more comment that David wanted to make, but before also let me make a point for the Kyiv audience. We're going to collect this comment and then we will come back to Sergei, and please give the signal to the moderator, Sergei, if you have a question. So prepare your questions and we will be over to you in 2 minutes. David, over to you.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I just wanted to point to one of the good practice examples, which is reflected in the fourth round evaluation report of GRECO on Ukraine, which was published in 2017. For instance, the report highlights the valuable role that the Committee on Corruption Prevention plays in Parliament of Ukraine, and namely it says a clear example of good practice is corruption proofing of legislative proposals, which entails verification of draft normative proposals which may facilitate commission of corruption-related offences. So that was one point. And the other comment I wanted to make is indeed corruption scandals in international parliamentary assemblies. They can shake to the core the credibility of the work that the institutions are doing. And the last year's scandal is not, unfortunately, the only one. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe had something comparable a few years back. And to respond to that, GRECO actually assessed, outside of its formal evaluation procedure, GRECO assessed the integrity framework of the Parliamentary Assembly and produced a report with specific recommendations. I'm happy to say that the EU is observer to GRECO since 2019. And we are gingerly speaking every now and then about EU's full membership on GRECO, which is also envisaged by its statute. So these are the comments I wanted to offer for the moment.
Thank you, David. And over to you with this, Sergei.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would ask if there is... I see a question there, because I also have a question from me, but I will have a time for that. So please.
Thank you. I'm Tatiana Zavoronyia, National Agency on Corruption Prevention, and thank you for giving the floor. As we know, the EU uses different instruments to evaluate the reforms of implementation of such reforms, and among them are already mentioned mechanisms as well as GRECO, OECD Istanbul Action Plan, but what considered to be the most reliable way to evaluate the progress of Ukraine in managing anti-corruption reforms? And it might be my second question, how does one effectively prioritize among diverse recommendations, which might be even contradicting to some extent? Thank you.
And it's raise a question to the Brussels audience, I guess, yeah.
I guess, yes.
Sure. Should we take it, Sergey?
Yeah, yeah.
Great. I'll go to Cornell
Sure.
to take it, and then I have two more questions.
Happy to answer to that. Perhaps first of all, I should refer to what my colleague Wolfgang said here this morning. Yeah, it's indeed a tricky question and a long-term process. I think, first of all, yeah, there's always a gradation in what comes from Brussels in this enlargement process. And I think you will see this more closely as well once the negotiations open. So the first thing that we always look at are these famous benchmarks, interim benchmarks, closing benchmarks in the whole chapter 23 and 24 process. Very technical, but those are the really core issues that EU member states look at for you to progress to the next step. So this is really the highest level of recommendations. Of course, the enlargement process is a political and technical process both. So there's always this political element, which makes it difficult to give a concrete technical answer on where the finish line is. But I think, first of all, what you will see also when the screening process starts is you will be given more concrete guidance, basically, on what we consider to be the EUACI, and then how far we think you are along this and what additional steps need to be taken. So this is all still to come to a large part for you. As it was mentioned this morning, these initial steps that were needed for the first steps for the opening of the accession negotiations, that's really only the beginning. And then the screening process really looks deeper into that and will give more concrete guidance as well.
Good to hear that. And I had more comments lined up from Roland and Elena, so maybe let's start with Roland.
Thank you very much. I would like to answer to Simon a bit because you mentioned the Qatar Gate and what has changed. And I think from this Brussels point of view, it was very clear that there was an initial shock, and after everyone talked about how to reform it, yet 1 year on, many of the reforms actually didn't even take place, or what changed was definitely not enough. It is very clear that there is still a risk of conflict of interest, for example, for many members of the European Parliament. Side incomes actually got even worse, the system, how it was before. So indeed, when we talk about impunity, there is still, I would say, a culture of impunity among some of the members of the European Parliament as well. And of course, we can also talk about some of the member states. Now, when you look at, well, I have to give this caveat that I'm from Hungary. And so if you look at some of for example, in Hungary, I'm pretty sure that there is not much petty corruption left. For example, if you want to do, I don't know, dealing with building permits or whatnot with local authorities or with police, there is no way that you could bribe them. Because in Hungary, many of the corruption most of the corruption is monopolized and by the governing party. And many of the things are, in fact, perfectly legal because they captured the state. And they are creating the laws themselves so to make it legal how they take the public resources. To try to end on a positive note, I might say that those movements and those works, what we've heard from Kyiv and from Lithuania, I think we shouldn't underestimate them, because indeed, if we want to have some kind of sustainable change, this is very important to involve as many actors and stakeholders, and really from education to local authorities and many people, whoever we can, to include in this fight to really have some kind of more sustainable change.
Thank you, Roland. I got a signal from Sergey that there are questions in Kyiv, so let's hear that. Over to you, Sergey.
Yeah, to be frank, we have several, but if I may, I would ask one from my side, just to reflect what Irina said about perception of corruption. As we know, indeed, it is higher than corruption itself. Is there any idea circulating, maybe in Transparency International, because we I hope still have representatives there in Brussels, maybe to change some measurement, and maybe some people in Ukrainian audience have some ideas how can we change this perception for Western consumers of this analysis.
Sure. I think this question really goes to Roland next to me. So just also reflecting on the question, it's not the reality, it's the perception. So maybe you can also tell us on that. And then I have a comment lined up by Elena on the how can we measure actually corruption. So over to you first, Roland.
Thank you very much. I will be brief. I work at Transparency International EU. It is our big organization, our movement, which does corruption perception index. It's not me. So, with this having in mind, this is really important to know that indeed this is about perception. And when you talk about it, when you measure it, this can be useful for a lot of things. It's useful to see, for example, changes, some kind of trends. But then again, it is never about pinpointing to one single day, one single country, how it works. And it has a lot of good and bad side. But I think actually Alina can say a lot more of like what other good forms we have when you want to have it in a measurable form.
Right, so we have something now and we hopefully will have more in the future. So what we have now is that if you go to www.corruptionrisk.org, you will find there are 3 categories of indicators which are fact-based and which I cited to you earlier. It's a model-based system in which components of corruption, things that we can statistically verify that they produce finally something that we call corruption, right, and which correlates with the perceptions very well. And you can see what happened with those in the past 10 years. And this is what I cited earlier when I told you that Ukraine improved on e-citizens, people connected who have internet household connections, and online services offered by government, but didn't change on judicial independence for the past 10 years, didn't change on freedom of the press, didn't change on fiscal transparency, which is another indicator. So just go to www.corruption.org and you will see this. What I think is very optimistic, though, is that if you go there, you cannot compare corruption perception index across time due to issues which relate to the aggregate nature of our statistics. But we have developed another system of being able to trace change across time. And if you go there, you see that this year for the first time, maybe we didn't upload the data, but next week it's going to be uploaded the latest data. Estonia is number 5 in the world. It moved ahead of United States of America. So if you ask yourself, where do I find these great examples that we have to copy? The answer is right there. Right there, and not just in Estonia's anti-corruption institutions, as I said from the start, but look at Estonia's marvelous administrative law. They are the only ones which manage, and Georgia, I think to some extent, to clean up all this complicated, rife in corruption opportunities, Soviet-time legislation, and create laws which prevent corruption. I mean, there is the answer. Imagine Estonia ahead of the United States. And it's not so surprising, no, because the institution from the United States, the Office for Government Ethics, that I copied in the Agency for Public Integrity in Romania 20 years ago, and that lots of other countries, including Ukraine, copied now, has lawsuits by President Trump and his son-in-law. So definitely, so United States went back, but Estonia also went up. So in Estonia, you have the administrative layer, which people don't look at. How do they organize? And this is, luckily for them, pre-accession. All right, they built the state, and then they started to be concerned about integration, all these complications. Okay, integration will not deliver the kind of administrative simplicity that you need to prevent corruption. But the example is there. And then, of course, they had the digital start or the other start. And the other thing which I need to say is that in the future, hopefully, we will have a more objective framework, the one which was adopted this week at COPS, the United Nations Conference Against Corruption, the Union of State Parties. We did develop a matrix to compare both de jure indicators and de facto indicators, because it's not enough to count the number of people who went into seminars and were trained, right? This doesn't really let you meaningfully appreciate corruption. And they already negotiated this with 120 countries. So already we lost some indicators. The metrics is out there. And 120 countries pledged that their statistical offices are going to adopt and they're going to collect this data from next year on. So in the future, hopefully we will be able to get better data. But right now, all we can offer you is what you find in corruptionrisk.org. Or again, I recommend using the public procurement scoreboard of the European Commission, which is quite good to see where is the real situation in Europe and how countries vary across.
This is very insightful. Thank you so much, Alina, for sharing the website with us. Olena, briefly over to you.
Thank you, Janine. Yes, I'm Olena Prokopenko. I manage Ukraine program at the European Endowment for Democracy here in Brussels. We support over 100 civil society organizations and media across Ukraine, including some of the leading anti-corruption organizations. As it has been said before, today Ukraine is making progress in fighting corruption amid Russia's full-scale invasion, which is already quite remarkable. And in this context, I have a question for our civil society colleagues in Kyiv about the martial law restrictions as they relate to access to public information. And the question is basically, how do these restrictions affect civil society's ability to effectively serve as a watchdog, to ensure accountability in all the key areas, including military procurements, including recovery planning? How proportional are these measures to the actual wartime needs, and how can we address possible excessive measures, if any, in order to empower civil society and in order to bring more accountability to the process? Thank you.
Thanks, Olena. And this is really a question to you, Sergey. So
yeah, indeed, and so the floor comes to us, and we have our speakers who would be able to address that question, and I guess also questions that I posed before about other types of measurement. Ivan, let's start from you, because when it comes to authorities' actions.
Well, first of all, the good news arrived that the draft law on strengthening the NABU was adopted by the Parliament of Ukraine. Just now. So just during our conference, we are strengthening our anti-corruption bodies. And of course, I would say that following the different experiences, and there, as I said, there is no direct role model, and of course the examples of countries like Estonia, Georgia is very important for us, but there is no like pill from the corruption, and only one. So as I said in my speech, we will take different approaches as of the national anti-corruption program. Everyone could do this kind of outcome. But in any case, following what our colleagues from European Commission said, of course, if the European Union will adopt the anti-corruption directive, it will become a part of the EUACI that we will have to implement during the accession, partly, or and of course in general after joining the EU. So it could help us to maybe have this kind of general rules that we in any case have to follow. So Ukraine will follow this, and I will say that together with EUACI we will bring as much results as possible.
Irina, I would ask you to reflect also to question from Brussels. So do you see that all these restrictions that we have during martial law, are they really needed in this scale?
I think, Sergey, you're putting me in a very difficult position because I'm here also representing partially the European Union, as our initiative is being supported and established by European Commission. But at the same time, it depends with which hat I'm speaking, right? Because if I'm speaking as a Ukrainian or as a representative of European institution, and I think that in what is EU demand, and we can all see an enlargement report and all the concerns also about the access to the declaration, the register, or to other documents well raised in the past. And as some speakers mentioned, it's also why we might have lost some points in corruption perception index as a country, because so many of them were closed. We, as a project, of course, analyzed with at least with the asset declaration register, the possibility of opening of the register, and our colleagues provided the analysis to ACP and to Commission to which extent it could be open to ensure all of their security reasons. As of now, we see that the register will provide the access to the information with exclusion of those who are fighting in the front line. So I think it's important for Ukrainian society, it was important for Ukrainian society to see what's going on in the country and to be sure that we will never become a Russia in many sense. Not just because of the occupation or invasion or the territorial occupation, but we will not become an authoritarian state that do not respect human rights, that does not allow civil society to be active and control the government effectively. And this is why the registers, opening of registers and access to information to data is so important to Ukrainians, to understand that they can see and control what the government is doing and to check and actively and vocally say if they're on track or not. And this is why we also support the civil society, who may be more open and more vocal than I am in my role about how the tracks of reform is going on. And I think it's an important role for them to play, and it's an important role for civil society to see how the government is acting and to have access to that information.
Okay, I'd like to involve us with your experience on the problems that was raised by many speakers. So perception of the corruption, which sometimes do not meet reality due to some juicy investigations that are very sound, that attract attention. Have you met that problem in Lithuania too?
Thank you for the question. Yes, corruption perception index we use. That not only we criticize discussing about this index, but still investors like foreigners use this indicator because we do not have another one. So we should analyze deeper these results and with separate indicators and see where is like weak places of particular case. And what I would like to emphasize a bit to another one direction, that a lot of like discussions are about how to adopt legal acts, how to build anti-corruption systems in different countries. But I had the opportunity to be as a president of anti-corruption network of EUACI, EUACI, and in this network we had more than 100 institutions from 38 countries. And what we noticed, that anti-corruption ecosystem in Europe is built totally like fragmented. And it is very difficult to find counterpart in other country. For example, if I have information related with corruption in Spain, I do not know who is responsible for investigating corruption in Spain. If I would like to share information about corruption prevention, for example, in Slovak Republic, who is responsible for these duties? The same with lobbying, with asset declarations, with conflicts of interest, and etc. So, and when we talk, for example, about organized crime, we know that in each country there is police. We talk about money laundering prevention, we know that FIU, as a responsible institution, is in each country. But when we talk about fighting corruption, it is like unique institutional framework in each country. And it's quite difficult to organize like cross-border cooperation because competences like investigating range of crimes and articles in penal code is totally different. So I think I hope that new directive of European Union will put like a start on process to make it more united system for fighting corruption.
Okay. Thank you. There was a signal from a second row that you would like to ask something.
Yes, thank you. Good morning to everyone. My name is Lankin Sagi. I'm a criminal lawyer in Ukraine. So I have kind of message and question to our Brussels colleagues. So during this event, we talked mainly about Ukraine metrics, about fighting corruption. We talk about integration to European Union, and especially about NABU investigations and high anti-corruption court number of verdicts. Was like in 2023 in my work, especially in many cases, public cases about my clients, that many of the times are suspects in these cases. When detectives or NAB published their work, social media start to yell in how it's possible to make such decisions that are potentially criminal and demands results here and now. That's very big problem in our society. But when resonance gets down, in many cases, there are different results, different law results that society expected. In many cases, we have problems that are cases getting dismissed or getting cancelled because of violations during investigation. So my question is about do European Union and our colleagues includes analysis of final results of fighting corruption and number of cases that wasn't cancelled by our appeal court, by European Court of Human Rights? The final results.
So the question is, because we are running out of time.
Question is about, do this analysis and in fighting corruption includes final legal results of this fighting?
It's rather for Brussels?
Yeah, for Brussels colleagues.
So Tina, floor is yours again.
Sure. I see Alina feels like commenting on it. Is that right? Or I can go.
This is just illustration of what I said earlier, that you should not use what is part. You should not use what is part of a problem as a solution. I mean, of course, they're going to look at all time of final sentences, but what will this indicator speak about in the end? We speak about the will to comply to Brussels. You try to prosecute some people, right? And then some courts let them go. And in the end, Yanukovych was even let go by the European Justice Court. So maybe the European Justice Court is corrupt and we should challenge this. This is just the wrong indicator to focus on prosecutions, but that's not your fault, that's Brussels' fault. We should de-emphasize this indicator. Sorry.
No, but well, first of all, I should refer to my colleagues from this morning because we're not the only ones going over this. But I think you make a good point because from our side, when we talk about this track record in general, we look across the entire chain of justice. And yes, we look at final convictions, but we also look at the steps in between. And if we see that lots of investigations get dropped in cases where it seems like, there's political favoritism or high-level figures are the ones who get off without getting further in the process, then this is something we're pointing at as well. This is even something we point at currently in EU member states. For example, you might have heard of the Commission's annual rule of law report in a number of EU countries. I can name, for example, Bulgaria to give one. We give recommendations clearly where we talk about, you need to have investigations that also process beyond, just accusing someone and then the case going nowhere. So this is certainly an element.
Sure, please.
Yeah, thank you. And as we are really out of time, we have two very short comments from our panelists because they requested. So please, Steve.
I would like to add one very short remark about this question. This question is very, very good question about evidences and like final decisions in corruption cases in different countries. And what was done recently now in European Union, we have European Prosecutor's Office. And European prosecutors participate in national courts in fraud cases. And my suggestion would be to expand competence of European Prosecutor's Office and to make them possible to participate in high-level corruption cases, but not only for like ensuring objective process in national courts, but to have possibility to bring this like data about this case to European Prosecutor's Office for deeper analysis. And for analysis, evidences and level like evidences what is necessary in one country and another, and to make like reports what differences between practice, judiciary practice in high-level corruption cases is.
Yeah. Thank you, Ivan. Very shortly, please.
European prosecutor also goes to national courts. Okay.
Yep.
I would just add about the corruption perception. This perception, I believe, will change after there will be more and more cases when big things are done without any corruption. When the all of the meetings with business associations and people who represent all of the even clusters of economy, they will not say in every meeting with international donors and Ukrainian government that there is the problem with corruption. So as more there will be good practices together, and I believe that together with our partners, we're gonna change this situation. We will implement the systemic measures over the fighting corruption, and there will be change of this perception also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have to finish in any case, and I will try to sum up both panels. First of all, everyone is sure that Ukraine is moving towards anti-corruption Ukraine to the degree which is possible, because fully anti-corruption countries simply do not exist. And also we see that our marathon is, well, far from to be accomplished. And everyone understands that Ukraine will have to run. We'll have to run even after we become the EU member, and it will happen earlier or later. And I think that the best illustration of what I said, that Ukraine do understand that, is what is happening right now in Verkhovna Rada. Because as I see that laws are being voted with more than constitutional majority, 332 votes as far as I see in Telegram messages. So it means that all parties are united to adopt laws that are making Ukraine free of corruption to the degree which is possible. So, Tina, what do you see on Brussels' perspective as a sum up of these two panels?
Sure, I think that was already a very good summary. I agree with you. There is a divergence on the where Ukraine stands in terms of running its marathon, which it now runs together with the member states of the EU. Most of the panel participants agree that the moving is there. You know, it started already, the moving with the marathon. So very much with you on that, Sergei. The other thing is that the sharing the best practicing is a two-way process. So there is things that EU can also learn from Ukraine, particularly taking into account that EU's legislation is outdated. And EU is also crafting its laws right now and revises it. And also the standard setters go beyond the European Union. We mentioned here the role of Greco.
The sound has disappeared. Something says us that we have to finish, because, well, you became silent. It means that it's my turn. Oh, yeah, sure. Now you hear us.
Now we're here. Yeah. Great. Sergei, where should I start from? Marathon, I think, was clear, so yeah, I will go to the second point.
Only last words. Only last words.
Sure. So that's basically the standard setting goes beyond the EU. There is the role here from the international organizations, Greco, OECD, and also Ukraine's its own takes and best practices. The questions remain on how we measure the progress, what is the best measurement. As we could agree, there is none, but there are various measurements here and indicators. And thanks, Alina, for informing us, the public. There is this www.corruption.org that we can all consult. Corruptionrisk.com, sorry. And also the engagement of the civil society, which turns out to be very important and informing the citizens. And to this end, I hope our event also played a role here. So these are the takes from me, Sergey. Over to you.
Thank you. So we are over on discussion, but we have to finalize the official part. And I invite Alan to make a final statement from the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative. So would you like to go here or sitting? Okay.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. I think this was a very interesting, relevant, lively discussion that took us far. I like the marathon metaphor that went through our discussion today. We talked about where is Ukraine on the way to the end of these 42 kilometers. We talked about, I mean, while Ukraine is preparing for membership, the goalposts are still moving. It's not a static process. Perhaps the marathon will be 50 kilometers at the end of the day.
It's cheating.
Yeah, it happens. We also learned that perhaps it's not so important with where Ukraine is, but the speed in which Ukraine is running, and all the obstacles that can be put there on the way to avoid Ukraine succeed. I think that was a good metaphor. I think you made some good concluding remarks, Sergey and Tina. No reason for me to repeat, just to say that the format for this roundtable today was a bit an experiment for us. I think it worked well. Technical aspects worked well, and it was good to be connected with our colleagues in Brussels and get the European perspective for our work. We lost a few of the high-level speakers in the run-up to our event today, and I think we all understand why. It's a crunch time for Ukraine and the EU with the summit coming up next week. We had important meetings in Brussels today, and as you learned, also important meeting at the plenary here in Kyiv. So perhaps that was what we could expect. But anyway, I think the debate was great. Let me just end by thanking Tina and Sergey for your moderation, for taking us through these hours in a strict but very open and polite fashion, and getting the best out of our speakers. Thanks for that. Thanks to the speakers and to the active audience for the questions. And thanks to all those that watched online. I think quite a number of people followed the debate this morning. And of course, big thanks to CEPS for being our European partner in this experiment today. And thanks a lot for the good cooperation we had in the run-up to this event. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone, and see you next time, maybe in the same composition, after Ukraine will start negotiations to join EU finally as a country that has fought corruption successfully.
Let's end with that. And of course, CEPS will stay engaged with all of you. So next time, see you in Brussels too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now lunchtime.